The landing at Nellis Air Force Base attracted more attention than Sarah had expected. Word of the unprecedented rescue mission had spread throughout the base, and a crowd of personnel had gathered to watch the F-22 taxi back to its parking area. Sarah could see faces pressed against hangar windows and groups of pilots and technicians standing on the flight line. As she shut down the engines and began her post-flight procedures, Sarah realized that her 3-year effort to maintain a low profile had ended completely. The quiet training instructor who had arrived at work that morning no longer existed. Colonel Williams was waiting for her as she climbed out of the cockpit. The base commander's expression was a mixture of professional approval and personal curiosity. "Outstanding work out there, Lieutenant," the colonel said as Sarah removed her helmet. "I've received confirmation that all 4 survivors are receiving medical care and are expected to make full recoveries." "Thank you, ma'am. I'm glad we were able to get them out. What you accomplished today was extraordinary. Using an F-22 for personnel extraction is not something that appears in any manual I've ever read." Sarah nodded, still processing the magnitude of what she had just attempted. "It was necessary, Colonel. The conditions made conventional rescue impossible." "Indeed. But what interests me is how you knew it was possible at all." The question hung between them as they walked toward the debriefing area. Sarah knew that Colonel Williams was asking for more than a technical explanation. She wanted to understand how a supposedly routine training instructor had possessed the skills and knowledge to attempt something that experienced test pilots might consider impossible. "Ma'am, during my previous assignment, I had occasion to explore the F-22's capabilities in considerable detail." "Your previous assignment," Colonel Williams repeated thoughtfully. "Lieutenant, I think it's time we had a more complete discussion about your background." Before Sarah could respond, they were approached by a group of pilots from the base's fighter squadron. Leading them was Major Steve Harrison, the squadron's operations officer, whose expression showed the kind of professional respect that was rarely directed toward training instructors. "Ma'am," Major Harrison addressed Colonel Williams, "if it's appropriate, the squadron would like to express our appreciation for Lieutenant Chen's actions today." "Of course, Major." Harrison turned to Sarah. "Lieutenant, what you did out there today was some of the finest flying any of us have ever seen. We'd be honored to have you consider joining our squadron." Sarah was taken aback by the offer. Fighter squadrons rarely recruited directly from training units, and the invitation represented a significant recognition of her abilities. "That's very kind of you, Major, but I'm committed to my current duties." "With respect, Lieutenant, after today's performance, your current duties seem like a waste of your talents." Colonel Williams intervened. "Major, Lieutenant Chen and I have some matters to discuss. Perhaps we can revisit squadron assignments at a later time." As the group dispersed, Sarah found herself walking with the colonel toward the base headquarters building. The afternoon sun was setting behind the Nevada mountains, casting long shadows across the flight line. "Lieutenant," Colonel Williams said, "I've been making some inquiries about your previous assignment. The details are heavily classified, but I've learned enough to understand that your experience goes far beyond what most people on this base realize." Sarah remained silent, uncertain how much she should reveal about her test pilot background. "What I'm curious about," the colonel continued, "is why someone with your qualifications requested a transfer to routine duties 3 years ago." They had reached the colonel's office, and Sarah found herself seated across the desk from her commanding officer. Colonel Williams had the kind of direct manner that made evasion difficult. "Ma'am, sometimes people want a change of pace. Test work can be demanding." "I'm sure it can. But I suspect there's more to your story." Colonel Williams opened a file folder and consulted what appeared to be official correspondence. "I've received several phone calls this afternoon from very senior people in the Air Force. It seems that your actions today have attracted attention at the highest levels." Sarah felt a familiar knot forming in her stomach. One of the reasons she had requested transfer to training duties was to avoid the kind of high-level attention that came with experimental flight operations. "What kind of attention?" Lieutenant Sarah Chen walked through the corridors of Nellis Air Force Base with the same quiet confidence she'd carried for 3 years. At 28, she had become invisible in the best possible way. Her colleagues knew her as the reliable flight instructor who never missed a briefing, never complained about extra duties, and somehow always knew exactly what to do in emergency situations. What they didn't know was that before joining the regular Air Force, Sarah had spent 5 classified years as one of the military's most skilled test pilots. The morning started like any other. Sarah arrived at the base before sunrise, her coffee still steaming as she reviewed the day's training schedules. The new recruits would be practicing basic maneuvers in the T-38 Talons, and she would be evaluating their progress from the ground. It was routine work, far removed from the adrenaline-filled days when she had pushed experimental aircraft to their absolute limits. Captain Mike Torres, her closest friend on the base, found her in the briefing room studying flight patterns on the large digital display. Mike had tried countless times to figure out why someone with Sarah's obvious skills was content with training duties. She deflected his questions with the same gentle smile she used to avoid most personal conversations about her past. "Another day in paradise," Mike said, settling into the chair beside her. "You know, Chen, I've been thinking. You should really consider applying for the Advanced Fighter program. Your instincts are better than most pilots I've seen with twice your experience." Sarah looked up from her charts, her expression neutral but kind. "I'm happy where I am, Mike. Training the next generation feels meaningful. But, don't you ever want more excitement? More challenge?" The question hung in the air for a moment. Sarah did miss the thrill of pushing aircraft beyond their known capabilities, of being the first human to experience what a new machine could do. But those days belonged to a different life, one she had chosen to leave behind after a mission that had changed everything. "Some people are meant for different things," she replied simply. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Colonel Patricia Williams, the base commander. Colonel Williams was a no-nonsense leader who had earned her position through decades of exceptional service. She rarely appeared in the training briefing rooms unless something significant was happening. "Chen, Torres, good morning," the colonel said, her voice carrying the weight of authority. "I need to speak with Lieutenant Chen privately." Mike gathered his materials and left, shooting Sarah a curious glance. Colonel Williams waited until they were alone before continuing. "Lieutenant, I've received some interesting information about your background," the colonel began. "Information that suggests you're qualified for duties far beyond what you're currently assigned." Sarah felt her stomach tighten. The classified nature of her previous work meant that very few people in the regular Air Force knew the details of what she had done before requesting a transfer to standard duties. She had hoped to keep it that way. "Ma'am, I'm not sure what information you're referring to," Sarah responded carefully. Colonel Williams smiled slightly. "Lieutenant, I've been in this business for 30 years. I know when someone is operating below their capability level, and I know when there's more to a story than what's in the official files." The colonel moved to the window overlooking the flight line, where several F-16s were being prepared for the day's training missions. "What I'm curious about is why someone with your qualifications would request a transfer to training duties. Most pilots fight tooth and nail to get into combat positions." Sarah joined the colonel at the window. Below them, mechanics swarmed over the aircraft with practiced efficiency. It was a sight that still stirred something deep in her chest, despite her attempts to focus on her current role. "Sometimes people need a change of pace," Sarah said. "Training pilots is important work." "Indeed it is," Colonel Williams agreed. "But I suspect there's more to your story than a simple desire for routine." The two women stood in comfortable silence for several minutes, watching the activity on the flight line. Sarah found herself remembering the last time she had been in the cockpit of a truly advanced fighter. It had been a modified F-22, equipped with experimental systems that pushed the boundaries of what was possible in aviation. The mission had been successful, but the cost had been higher than anyone anticipated. "Colonel," Sarah said finally, "if you don't mind me asking, why are you bringing this up now?" "Because, Lieutenant, situations sometimes arise that require the best people available, regardless of their current assignments or personal preferences." Before Sarah could respond, the colonel's radio crackled to life. The voice on the other end was urgent and professional. "Colonel Williams, we have a developing situation. Please report to the command center immediately." The colonel's expression shifted instantly from conversational to all business. "Copy that, on my way." She turned to Sarah. "Lieutenant, I'd like you to come with me." "Ma'am, I'm scheduled to supervise training flights this morning." "I'll have someone else cover that. Right now, I think your particular expertise might be needed." As they walked quickly through the corridors toward the command center, Sarah's mind raced. The colonel's mention of her background, combined with the urgent summons, suggested that whatever was happening was serious enough to require resources beyond the base's normal capabilities. The command center was a hub of controlled activity. Multiple screens displayed everything from weather patterns to air traffic control data. Several officers were speaking rapidly into headsets while others analyzed incoming information. The tension in the room was obvious. Colonel Williams approached the duty officer, a major Sarah didn't recognize. "What's the situation?" "Ma'am, we've got a developing crisis about 400 miles northwest of here. A civilian research aircraft went down in remote mountain terrain during a severe weather system. The aircraft was carrying a team of scientists working on classified atmospheric research." Sarah listened as the major continued his briefing. The research team had been studying high-altitude atmospheric phenomena using specialized equipment. Their aircraft, a modified business jet, had encountered unexpected severe turbulence and had been forced to make an emergency landing in extremely remote terrain. "The good news is that we've established radio contact with the survivors," the major continued. "The bad news is that the weather system is intensifying, making conventional search and rescue extremely difficult. Helicopters can't operate safely in those conditions, and ground teams would take days to reach the location." Colonel Williams studied the weather data on the main display. "What about fixed-wing aircraft?" "That's where it gets complicated, ma'am. The terrain is extremely challenging, with narrow valleys and rapidly changing weather patterns. The only aircraft that could potentially operate safely in those conditions would be something with exceptional maneuverability and advanced avionics." Sarah felt a familiar sensation, the mental shift that happened when her training took over. She found herself analyzing the displayed terrain data and weather patterns, automatically calculating approach angles and assessing risk factors. "How many survivors?" Colonel Williams asked. "For confirmed, ma'am. One is seriously injured and needs immediate medical attention." "Time frame?" "The weather system is expected to worsen significantly over the next 12 hours. After that, the area will be completely inaccessible for at least 3 days, possibly longer." Colonel Williams was quiet for a long moment, studying the displays and considering options. Finally, she turned to Sarah. "Lieutenant Chen, what would you need to attempt a rescue mission in those conditions?" The question hit Sarah like a physical blow. She understood immediately what the colonel was asking, and why she had been brought to the command center. The mission would require skills and experience that very few pilots possessed, and somehow the colonel had figured out that Sarah was one of those pilots. "Ma'am," Sarah began carefully, "I would need to know more about the specific conditions and available aircraft before I could assess the feasibility of such a mission. The only aircraft on this base capable of operating in those conditions would be the F-22. Sarah's breath caught. The F-22 Raptor was the most advanced fighter aircraft in the world, with capabilities that far exceeded anything else in the American inventory. It was also an aircraft she knew better than perhaps any other pilot alive, thanks to her years of classified test work. "Colonel, with respect, the F-22 is a single-seat fighter aircraft. It's not designed for search and rescue operations." "No, but it's designed to operate in conditions that would be impossible for other aircraft. And, with the right pilot, it could potentially locate the survivors and coordinate a rescue that would otherwise be impossible." The weight of the decision pressed down on Sarah. She had left her test pilot career behind for good reasons, seeking the predictability and lower stakes of training duties. But 4 people were trapped in impossible conditions, and time was running out. "I would need complete mission autonomy," she said finally. "No oversight, no second-guessing from the ground once I'm airborne." "Agreed." "And I would need access to all available intelligence about the terrain and weather patterns." "Done." Sarah took a deep breath. Then, yes, Colonel. I believe the mission is possible. The next few hours passed in a blur of preparation. Sarah found herself back in an environment she had thought she'd left behind forever, surrounded by technical specialists and intelligence analysts working to give her every possible advantage. Mike Torres found her in the pilot preparation area, where she was reviewing detailed topographical maps of the search area. "Chen, what the hell is going on? I heard you're taking up an F-22 on some kind of emergency mission." Sarah looked up from the maps. For the first time since she'd known him, Mike was seeing a completely different person. The quiet training instructor had been replaced by someone with the focused intensity of a combat pilot. "Mike, I can't discuss the details, but, yes, I'm going up." "But, you're not even qualified on the F-22. Are you?" The question hung between them. Sarah realized that this moment would change how her colleagues saw her, regardless of how the mission turned out. "Mike," she said quietly, "there's a lot about my background that isn't in my regular service record. Let's leave it at that." Before Mike could respond, a technician approached with Sarah's flight gear. The familiar weight of the equipment brought back memories she had tried to suppress. In a few hours, she would be back in the cockpit of the most advanced aircraft in the world, flying a mission that would test every skill she had ever developed. As she suited up, Sarah couldn't help but think about the path that had brought her to this moment. 3 years ago, she had walked away from test flying after a mission that had pushed both her and her aircraft beyond their limits. She had requested a transfer to training duties, seeking a quieter life that would allow her to contribute to the Air Force without the constant risk and pressure of experimental flight. Now, circumstances had conspired to pull her back into the world she had tried to leave behind. For lives depended on skills she had hoped never to use again in such extreme conditions. The irony was not lost on her. For 3 years, her colleagues had seen her as a competent but unremarkable training instructor. In a few hours, they would learn that she was one of the most qualified pilots on the base for the most challenging mission any of them had ever seen. As Sarah completed her pre-flight preparations, she felt the familiar mental shift that separated exceptional pilots from good ones. The quiet instructor was gone, replaced by the focused professional who had once pushed the boundaries of what was possible in aviation. Colonel Williams found her in the final stages of preparation. "Any second thoughts, Lieutenant?" Sarah looked up from checking her equipment one final time. "No, ma'am. Those people need help, and this might be their only chance. What you're attempting is extremely dangerous, even for someone with your qualifications. I understand the risks, Colonel. But I also understand the consequences of doing nothing." As Sarah walked toward the aircraft, she reflected on how dramatically her day had changed. 12 hours ago, she had been preparing to supervise routine training flights. Now she was about to attempt a rescue mission that would test every skill she possessed. The F-22 Raptor sat on the tarmac like a predator waiting to strike. Even on the ground, the aircraft radiated power and capability. Sarah had spent countless hours in similar aircraft during her test pilot years, but she had never grown tired of the sense of awe that came from being trusted with such an advanced machine. The ground crew completed their final checks as Sarah approached the aircraft. Each technician knew they were preparing the plane for something unusual, though few understood exactly what the mission entailed. As Sarah began her walk-around inspection of the aircraft, she found herself slipping back into habits and procedures she had developed years ago during her classified work. Every surface, every system, every detail had to be perfect for what lay ahead. The weather briefing had been sobering. The storm system was unlike anything in recent meteorological records, with wind shears and turbulence that would challenge even the most advanced aircraft. The terrain was equally daunting, with narrow valleys and unpredictable air currents that could turn deadly without warning. But Sarah also knew that the F-22's capabilities were uniquely suited to these conditions. The aircraft's thrust vectoring, advanced flight control systems, and superior power-to-weight ratio gave it options that no other aircraft possessed. As she completed her inspection and prepared to climb into the cockpit, Sarah was approached by Chief Master Sergeant Rodriguez, the senior enlisted man responsible for the F-22 maintenance program. "Lieutenant," the chief said, "I've been working on Raptors for 15 years, and I've never seen anyone inspect an aircraft the way you just did. Wherever you learn to fly these machines, you learn from the best." Sarah smiled slightly. "Thank you, Chief. I'll take good care of her." "Ma'am, with respect, I think it's the other way around. That aircraft is going to take care of you." As Sarah climbed into the cockpit, she was struck by how familiar everything felt. Despite 3 years away from high-performance aircraft, her hands moved automatically to the correct switches and displays. The cockpit of the F-22 was like returning to a childhood home after a long absence. The startup procedures came back to her as if she had flown the aircraft yesterday. Each system came online with the smooth precision that made the F-22 one of the most advanced machines ever created. Ground control cleared her for taxi, and Sarah began moving toward the runway. Through her headset, she could hear the controlled urgency of the various personnel coordinating her mission. Weather updates, intelligence reports, and technical advisories flowed in a steady stream. "Rescue 1, you are cleared for takeoff when ready," came the voice from the tower. Sarah advanced the throttles and felt the familiar surge of power that came from two of the most advanced jet engines ever built. The F-22 accelerated down the runway with an authority that few aircraft could match. As the aircraft lifted off and climbed rapidly into the afternoon sky, Sarah felt a mixture of emotions she hadn't experienced in years. The pure joy of flying an exceptional aircraft was tempered by the knowledge that 4 lives depended on her skills and the mission she was about to attempt. Below her, Nellis Air Force Base shrank rapidly as the F-22 climbed toward its cruising altitude. Sarah knew that when she returned, everything would be different. Her quiet life as a training instructor was over, and whatever came next would depend on the success or failure of the next few hours. The aircraft performed flawlessly as Sarah settled into the long cruise toward the search area. Every system functioned with the precision that had made the F-22 the most capable fighter aircraft in the world. But Sarah knew that the real test would come when she reached the storm system and the treacherous mountain terrain where 4 people were waiting for rescue. As the miles passed beneath her, Sarah found herself thinking about the choices that had led her to this moment. 3 years ago, she had walked away from test flying because she had wanted a life with lower stakes and fewer risks. Now, she was flying the most dangerous mission of her career, and 4 lives hung in the balance. The irony was complete. In trying to escape the high-pressure world of experimental flight, she had ended up in a situation that required every skill she had ever developed. The quiet training instructor her colleagues thought they knew was about to reveal capabilities that none of them had suspected. Ahead of her, clouds were beginning to build as she approached the storm system. Soon, she would be flying in conditions that would challenge both her skills and the aircraft's capabilities to their absolute limits.